from analog
Hi, Jim. You have a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
to digital. We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to CQ Blind Hams Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about all kinds of things related to ham radio from a blindness perspective. And today's topic is one that I'm sure will be of interest to a lot of people, especially if you're a fan of the open GD77 family of radios. We are going to introduce a new member to that family. It is a mobile radio. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the crew here. I have my co-host, Joel, W0CAS. We're joined by Bob K8LR, Gena, M0EBP, and Ian Spencer, DJ0HF. And we're going to talk about this brand new fine radio. Let me kick it over here to Joel for a second and see if he wants to say anything.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Yeah, we put together this cast of characters to talk about this great new entry to the GD70 family of radios, and we've always wanted another accessible mobile radio. We've only mostly relied on the Kenwood TMV71A. Now we have a DMR version that we have available to us, and Julian, pass it over to Bob and see how he's doing, I guess.
Yeah, Bob K8LR, you were one of the first people here on the Blind Ham Systems that got a hold of one of these radios. How are you liking it so far?
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. I really do. And let me just turn it on here. And it has a voice very similar to the GD77. And actually, it's actually very similar to a GD77 in a box. You know, it's in a mobile box. It'll run 40 watts on high power on 440, and I think 45 watts on 2 meters. And I love this radio. Back to you, Julian.
That is awesome. Yeah, and I love the sound of the voice right when it comes up. Does it have the option to play chimes like the GD77 radios do?
It does.
I don't. I have it give my call sign in CW when I turn it on. That's in my code plug, and it takes the same code plug as the GD77.
Yeah, that's a lovely thing about it, is that it's something you're already familiar with, and you can put in the same code plugs and all that. I mean, it's just great to see this family expand. Gena, M0EBP, has one of these radios as well. So Gena, tell us your findings of the radio thus far.
I'm definitely a fan of the radio. I can't sort of add any more to what has already been said, really. The configuration, you use the same code plug as you do for the GD77 or any of the other supported radios, but it's a mobile radio. I purchased mine simply for the FM access, simply because I've got a repeater that's just out of my reach with a handheld. It's within distance, but there's a hilltop in the way. So being able to use a mobile radio is going to just get me over that hill. I can, use a little bit more power and reach local repeaters, because it's really great having DMR and All-Star, and it's great, making friends across the water, etc. But sometimes it's really useful to be able to listen to hams in your own vicinity. So I'm hoping that it will give me access to more FM work and speak to local people as well, so that when I want an antenna put in, I can call on folks around me to come and help put it up.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, 40 watts and a well-placed antenna ought to definitely help you get over some of those hills a little bit. So that is great. So now to understand a little bit more about where this all comes from and, the technical ins and outs and such, Ian Spencer, one of the guys behind this project, and certainly helped to make this possible. How about telling us a little bit about this radio, how you guys came to zero in on it and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, okay. One of the main reasons was that its basic hardware concept is not so very different from the GD77, which meant that it was possible to port across a lot of the firmware from the GD77. And that's why you tend to see it looks and feels exactly the same as the GD77 with Open GD77, because basically a lot of the functions have been ported, and then what's been changed are all the drivers and special things that are needed for the chips in this radio. And we've been working on it now for some months. Really, it's more Roger in Australia, Daniel in France, and Colin in England that have been working on the firmware. And I do part of the testing, and especially the testing of the blind hams parts. And we've been testing for some months. But Roger is a perfectionist. He likes everything to be working 190% before he wants to release it. So he wasn't really planning to release what is now being called the alpha version. It was being used just by a small group of testers. And fortunately or unfortunately, depends on how you look at it. Roger always puts the firmware up so that we testers could download it, but it wasn't visible for other people. And he made a mistake and put it somewhere where people could find it. And Joe in Australia found it and, of course, announced to others. And so suddenly it was out there. And so Roger decided, OK, if it's out there, then it's out there, then we better start supporting it. He calls it an alpha version. I would call it a very good beta. We can see what Bob and Gena have to say, but there are very few problems with it. And the nice things about it are, of course, that it uses the same code plug as the GD77, as someone said, and also it's exactly the same voice packs, which is why the voices sound the same. And what is, of course, different is that you have got a lot more power, as Gena was saying, and that with sort of 40 watts if you want it. So, of course, if you're using it with a hotspot, you're probably only going to use 100 milliwatts. Also, of course, it's got the satellite functionality in it, and the same as the GD77. And maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. But because of the 40 watts, it's a lot easier to get into FM satellites with a simple antenna than it is with the GD77. And it has battery backup, which means it doesn't forget the date and time as the GD77 normally does. So that's sort of a basic view of what it's like. If you can see it, then the front panel looks very much like the front panel of the GD77 in that the screens are very similar, just bigger. But there are a lot more different buttons. And so the operation of the buttons is a bit different from the GD77. Back to you, Julian.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and I have to say, it's one of the nice things about this whole concept that you guys have put together is that, for once, you could use the same code plug, same everything on all the radios. So there isn't this steep learning curve that comes every time you add a radio to the mix. It's, you're using the same thing that you've been used to now for a while. And it's just, it's wonderful. And yeah, I had to chuckle when you were talking about, trying to keep the alpha under wraps, and eventually it gets out. That's always how it is. And people are clamoring to get at stuff. And, I know there's pros and cons to the whole thing about that. If you release it before you think it's ready, you worry about, well, if this breaks somebody's radio, or is this going to all of a sudden increase all the support emails and requests that you're going to get? How do you do this? Why isn't it doing that? But at the same time, I think that the pros to it is that, now you're getting feedback from a lot of other users. And in the end, I think it just helps to put together a better, more refined product that's really addressing the needs of the users. So, you mentioned the satellite. That's one thing I was always skeptical about with that available on the GD77 on these HTs. It's like these radios are, at least in my opinion, not the most adequate for satellite work, given primarily they listen on one band as opposed to two and all that stuff. But it's neat that it was out there. I always like having options. I think it's always good to have them. If you don't want them, you don't use them. But with a mobile radio, I think that absolutely changes everything. And now it really does make it a serious contender for using it for satellite work. And the beautiful thing is that blind people don't get left out in the cold. We could do it along with everybody else who's using this open product. So, Ian, if you could maybe just go over real quick, how does somebody go about setting up this radio to start working with this firmware?
Yeah, okay. Well, most people that have got the radio at the moment probably already have the GD77. And so it's very, very similar. What I did was I produced a new package just for the MD9600 and RT90, and you can find it on my website. So if you go to my website and then downloads and MD9600, you'll find my package. And if you're familiar with the GD77, then you'll recognize everything about it. There's the tutorials for uploading the firmware, creating the code plug, using the radio, and so on. And so really you just have to follow the tutorials just as you did with OpenGD77. And it should be fairly straightforward. Most people have not had too many problems. There is one fly in the ointment, and it's nothing to do with Open MD9600, but Retevis has got a problem with Windows 10. And it seems also with Windows 11. And so a lot of people, when they connect the radio to a Windows 10 machine, in theory, the Windows 10 driver should automatically be correctly loaded. And it doesn't. Well, the driver that loads won't talk to the Retevis radio. And I've spoken to Retevis about this, and they just ignore it. They're not interested. And it's nothing to do with Open MD9600, because you can't even talk to it with the normal Retevis firmware and software when you first get it. And so we do have a workaround for Windows 10, and it's also possible to get it working on Windows 11. But quite a lot of people have tripped over getting started because they just couldn't talk to the radio. And it's really, really annoying that Retevis doesn't accept responsibility for this problem, because as I say, it makes things very difficult at the beginning. But once you get the driver problem sorted out, then you just follow the instructions in my package, and they're very similar to the GD77, and most people don't have any problem. Back to you, back to you, Julian.
Yeah, go figure. Right, you know. Oh yeah, go ahead, Joel.
There's a couple of things I want to mention too.
Go ahead, Bob. I was going to ask you about does the 9600 also have that same driver?
Yes, it does. It has the same problem. And in fact, I had that problem, and I had to get it sorted out before I could even download the open software. And one thing I wanted to mention too, there are two threads of the open software. One is from Joe, VK7JS, and then Ian's packet. And the Joe software does not run on the MD9600. We have to use Ian's packet, which is fine. And Ian's package is the one that has the satellite support, whereas Joe's does not have satellite support. So it gets a little confusing. The other thing I want to mention is that there's a couple of features on the MD9600 and the RT90 that aren't available on GD77. One is a mute the click button under sound settings. This radio has an annoying speaker click when squelch or when it's done talking, and there's a mute the click button which turns that on. You can turn that on or off. There's also a button which increases the DMR audio level on receive, and it tends to be low. In fact, I've got mine turned up 15 dB, so it matches the FM volume level. Back to you, Julian.
Yeah, I almost think that might be a gift to have it come out of the box with lower DMR, because, man, some people on DMR just blast through it. Even if you have your radio at the lowest volume setting, it's like, and across the room, it's just blaring. So, but yeah. How about you, Joel? You had a comment or question?
No, I was going to ask Bob if the TYT 9600 has the same driver issue at Retevis. Right. Ian was just speaking to Retevis. Is Retevis and TYT the same company, Ian?
Not as far as I know, Joel. They're separate companies, I think. But of course, they're both using the same hardware design, and almost exactly the same firmware. So there are very few differences. It's not like badge engineering, basically. But yeah, it's just one of those things. And as Bob said, yeah, it does have this annoying clack that it makes when a transmission ends, but you can suppress that in the firmware. And so that's quite nice to be able to do. And as Bob says, you can actually increase the volume on DMR. So if you want it to be louder, though on transmit, most people say that the RT90 is very loud. And so, in fact, I actually turn the mic gain down. You can do that in the menus too. Back to you, Julian.
Yeah, I noticed on DMR on the GD77, I have to keep mine at -6 dB for transmit on DMR, and that's what's given me the better signal reports when I've asked people. So it is neat to have that all configurable. Gena, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I don't think so. I would suggest that, well, Ian's just covered that point, that the RT90 and the MD9600 are the same radios. The microphone perhaps Bob will want to talk about the quality of the microphone. But someone suggested about the button layouts. The front panel of the radio has a collection of buttons, and the menu system is slightly different to that of a GD77. You don't, in effect, have a green and red buttons that are sort of your go-to buttons. The navigation traversing through the menus is a little bit different. It's not impossible because it's fully speech enabled with the open firmware installed on it. It makes it easy. But obviously, a handheld does not feel like a mobile radio. They're totally different shapes and things. And the microphone has got a lot of buttons on that enable you to do many of the functions. So it's quite nice having that sort of remote control and being able to hold and punch in commands from the microphone. Perhaps Ian is probably more qualified to speak about the layout, having written the documentation. Ian would be better to describe what buttons are on the front of the radio and what buttons are on the fifth mic. Back to you, Julian.
Okay, yeah. And the other thing with that microphone is I've noticed on some of the audio, it tends to have this sort of harsh sound to it when someone's talking. Bob in particular, I think, could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it has the microphone is a very high end sensitive microphone. So you get a lot of highs, and the general audio is flat. So when you talk to somebody, you get a lot of highs and it overwhelms the system. And that's what causes the crackling that people hear. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that this radio is particularly good for satellite work, and maybe Ian could talk about that too. The Roger software supports satellite work, whereas Joe's software does not. So maybe Ian could talk a little bit about how it works on the satellite side.
Well, Joe didn't have software for this radio, so this is basically just the 9600 discussion. So Joe pretty much didn't come into this podcast too much as far as software. But yeah, I'm wondering also, is there another microphone that will work on this radio? It's a RJ45 connector? You think a Yaesu mic or some other mic might work on this radio, Ian?
I don't honestly know. I've not got any other mic. I have got a spare mic here, but it's the same type. It's certainly an RJ45, but I've not looked at the connections to see whether an Icon mic would work with it or not. Perhaps I will comment a little bit about the buttons and so on. Obviously, the buttons are quite different to the GD77 in some ways, because on the front panel, you've got an enter and an escape button, which are a little bit like the green and the red button on the GD77. And you've got an up and down sort of cursor button. But you've got 4 P programmable buttons on the front. P1 P1 is normally not so interesting at the moment, but P2, of course, is what we use for the voicing if you're in voice level 1. And one of the problems with the buttons is they can't work in the same way as the GD77. The GD77 buttons are connected into the microcontroller through the I/O port. And so you can press 2 buttons and the microprocessor can see both buttons. Unfortunately, the MD9600 and the RT90, that's not the case. The buttons are in a matrix and have to be scanned. And so you can only see one button at a time. So, for example, on the GD77, you would press the SK2 button and then maybe sort of press the star button. And the GD77 would see that you were holding the SK2 button when you press the star and do what you wanted it to do. You can't do that with an MD9600 or an RT90 because of the way the buttons work. And so what actually happens is we have a D button and P1. And if you press it and hold it for a couple of seconds, it latches just like holding the SK2. Then if you hit the star button, it does the same thing as the GD77 would do. And after a second or two, you get a beep from the radio, which tells you the latch has been released. And so it's not quite as convenient as the GD77, but necessary because of the way the buttons work. Back to you, Julian.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I was about to, as I'm hearing you say that, I'm thinking, well, can we set it up to we could double press a button and then it would latch? But you already thought of it. That's great. So one thing Bob brought up earlier that I think does warrant some attention, the satellite work. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it with the handhelds because, I just, in my personal opinion, I'm sure others have found it useful. But for me, I didn't really care that much about it because I figure, what can I really expect to do with a little handheld and satellites and things like that? But with a radio like this that has the capability to put out a lot more power and just in general be used more in that way, I think it suddenly becomes something that maybe more people will start paying attention to. So I was thinking that maybe you could give us a brief overview as to how the satellite feature works and maybe what can one expect to accomplish realistically doing satellite work and this mobile radio.
Yeah, okay. It is very similar to the GD77. People have used the GD77 on satellite, but you really need to connect it to sort of a handheld Yagi antenna pointing at the satellite. You can't just have an omnidirectional antenna because the 5 watts is normally not enough. But people have done it. They've spoken to the ISS and also AO91, for example. But obviously, it's going to be much, much easier with the RT90 for a number of reasons. The way it works is in the CPS, there's already a part of the CPS which will create the Kepler elements for satellite work. And so if you've got the RT90 or the GD77 connected to the computer, you can say upload KEPS, the Kepler elements, and it will upload into the radio all the data about all of the FM satellites and the space station. And you can set in the RT90 your longitude and latitude. If you've got the GPS model, you can actually transfer that into the settings. It's not done automatically at the moment, but you can do it. And once you've set the longitude and latitude where you are, when you select satellite, it will then calculate for all the satellites that it's got. And it does it really quickly. It says predicting, and it will give you a list of all the satellites over the next 24 hours, which are going to be coming within range. And if you select a satellite, it will tell you when it will come into range, how high it's going to rise above the horizon, at which angle, and the duration, how long it's actually going to be visible. And you actually, if you're sighted, you can actually see a little diagram which shows the position of the satellite moving across your sky. If you're not, then you've got it as digital information. It will say 0 degrees, 5 degrees, 6 degrees as the satellite rises over the horizon. And it will also tell you, for example, the satellite is at 278 degrees. And so you know where to point the antenna if you've got a directional antenna. And you know that if it's going to come up fairly high, so sort of 80 or 90 degrees, you've got a very good chance of working it because it's going to come quite close. And those near the horizon, of course, are going to be more difficult because maybe trees and hills and so on in the way. And the transmit receive frequencies for the satellite are already set up. So once you select a satellite, you don't have to bother about changing the transmit or the receive frequency. You don't have to do anything. You just have to listen, basically. And it does automatic Doppler correction. So as the satellite moves towards you, then that causes the frequency to increase. And as the satellite moves away from you, the frequency decreases. And the GD77 and the RT90 MD9600 calculate that Doppler change. And so it's always on exactly the right frequency for transmit and receive. Back to you, Julian.
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, I can say that I definitely need to give this a second look because that is incredible. That is really interesting and sounds like fun. And yeah, I think having a little more power is only going to increase the potential of this feature. So that's great. Well, I think we've pretty much covered all the general aspects of this. I guess the final question I would think of asking you, unless members of the crew here want to add anything as well, what do you see on the roadmap ahead for this project?
It's a little bit difficult to say. I don't think there are going to be any massive changes because obviously it was based on the GD77, which is pretty stable. And so I don't think there are going to be massive changes. There will probably be 1 or 2 changes to the way the buttons work because P3 at the moment is not really used. P4 is used as the star button as well as the star button on the microphone. So I think, some things maps will change a little bit. I don't think the functionality is going to change dramatically. I could be wrong because I can't read Roger's mind or Daniel's, but it is a pretty well-established product.
I got a question. Is the hardware, the memory, the RAM, is that quite a bit larger than the 77? Does it have more storage where you could put, say, all the DMR database in with all the firmware upgrades that Roger has implemented?
Yes, Joel, that's a very good point. And I didn't mention that, but the memory is enormous. I forget exactly how many megabytes it is, but it's big enough that you can put something like, I think it was something like 2 million call signs in there as a database. And as the DMR, I think is about 150,000. You can put the whole database in, no problem.
That's going to be interesting to a lot of hams that, especially in DMR, and like to upload the database to the radios. And we've run into some walls, I guess, having to maybe only put the Americans or the European call signs in. Excuse me. So that radio right there is going to make it even better radio for DMR users.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because that's definitely one of the shortcomings of the GD77 handheld family is that that it's so little memory that it's in those radios that's always been a sort of a stifling point. So that's great to hear that this mobile has all this memory that can now be used for uploading an entire DMR database.
One thing I should mention, this is Bob K8LR. These radios are hard to get right now. They're not in stock in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think it's because they got more troubles getting the chips again.
Yep, the same old story. The chip shortage, the supply shortage, the everything shortage, but somehow they have material to make ample masks, but that's a whole other thing. So so I guess the tenacity is the key. You got to go out there and hustle and try to find them.
Yeah, I noticed even the GD77 has been I think it's been out of stock at Radioddity and other places I've looked, and even the DM1801. Angelo even ordered a DM1801. I don't think he's ever received it. Only the RD5R is available at Radioddity right now. We just had a couple guys ordered them and got them this week. But those are the only accessible radios that are available right now, as far as I know, unless some stock has came in the last 2 or 3 days.
If I could mention one additional thing, the MD9600 and the RT90 both will work in hotspot mode. Now that's a mode where you plug the USB cable from the back of the MD9600 or RT90 into your Pi-Star setup. And instead of using the top hat modem, you use the GD77 modem listed in the modem list, and you can turn your radio into a digital hotspot. And a lot of the guys on the TGIF system and the TGIF talk group are now running 40-watt hotspots, and it's working out fantastic for them. One guy got 40 miles away from home and could still talk to his hotspot. It was amazing.
Oh, wow. That is amazing.
It is a mini repeater now, I guess.
It really is.
I mean, I know at least one person, not with the 40 watts, but with the normal 10 milliwatt hotspots, he gets about 2 miles with the antenna on his roof.
Great. Well, it seems like we got something else that's going to spend some more people's money. Right now, they're selling for about $289 at US. Is that right, Bob? I've seen them at Amazon for that. You got yours a good deal plus a power supply, wasn't it?
Yeah, I paid $279 for mine, and that included free shipping, and that included a 30-watt power. I mean, a 30 amp power supply, and that I paid $279 for it. So I got a really good deal, but that's not available anymore.
Yeah, I imagine not. Wow, that is a good deal. So yeah, I guess we had to put that somehow in the disclaimer of the podcast that you may end up spending more money than what you came in here with. But hey, that's what ham radio is about, right?
Yeah, we love to spend other people's money. That's for sure.
It's great. It's so much fun.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, you got anything else, Ian, that you can think of that we might not have covered?
Not at the moment. I think we've covered most of the bits and pieces. Yeah, the only new thing is, and it's the same on the GD77, is that Roger's software now has the voice prompts at variable speeds, and so you can have 1.0, 1.25, 2.0, 2.25. So for those that like to have much higher speed speech, that's quite nice.
Yeah, I for one love that capability. I love being able to speed things up. So I'm glad that that's included in there. Ian, you want to real quickly maybe give information on where people can go and learn about this project if they haven't already known about it, maybe they stumbled across this?
Yeah, okay. I mean, you can go to opengd77.com, which will take you straight to the forum, where you'll see all the questions and answers that people have been putting up there about the GD77 and about the MD9600. If you want to get my package, or you want to get more voice prompt packs, because not everybody likes the English voice, some like American voices, you can go to my website, and that's www.spencerweb.net. That's Sierra Papa Echo November Charlie Echo Radio, W Echo Bravo.net, November Echo Tango. And if you go to downloads, then you'll find a section for OpenGD77, another for MD9600, and there you can download the package, you can download the user guide, and you can download voice packs in various types, including various languages.
Awesome.
We'll also have that address in the show notes for the podcast and for YouTube.
And also, I was going to mention, don't we have links to it on Blind Hams as well?
We do. We also have Spencer Webb linked on blindhams.com.
So for anybody who wants to find it that way, it's www.blindhams.com. You go to Ham Radio Links, and among the many resources listed there are the links to these packages that we've been talking about here. So if
I can add something in addition, you've got to be careful about running Joe's software and Ian's software on the same system, because they're not totally compatible. Like, for example, Joe's voice prompts will not work on Roger's system.
No, That's true. Yeah, that's true. In fact, a number of things are different, because Joe uses an old version of the CPS, which he's done a few small mods to. So it's a rather different CPS, because the CPS from Roger has the satellite stuff in and all sorts of things. And so you really have two separate CPSs and completely separate voice packs.
Well, there you go.
Good point.
User beware, and keep in mind again that this is still an alpha project. It's come along very far. It is working nicely for people that are using it, but it is still at that stage. So you have to proceed with caution, and going by what your comfort level is in dealing with adversity or little speed bumps that may pop up. But hey, one thing about us hams, we love to tinker with things by nature. So I say get out there, have fun, play around, enjoy, and let's keep on making these accessible radios. I'm not going to miss this opportunity to once again just call out all the other companies here that manufacture radios. Here you have some people that are doing volunteer work in putting together these alternate versions of firmware that can turn these radios into something that is fully usable by a blind person, compared to companies that have a lot more money behind them and have all kinds of talent working for them. The fact that they can't get together and learn from this and put it into a radio so that a blind person can have the experience of buying it off the shelf and not having to jump through the hoop of going through a computer and installing firmware and doing all that stuff really says something. And that these companies won't even support people that are having problems with this Windows 10 and 11 driver situation. Again, when these guys are volunteering their own time to just make this happen, and you think you'd work with them and fix this driver issue, but no, you won't even do that. So just know that people take notice of this, and it's a shame that the big players in this field haven't caught on to this. The closest we've come really is Kenwood, and even they are not making a lot of these radios anymore. So take note, folks. People who are blind want to enjoy ham radio just like anybody else, and people who are sighted eventually get older, and a lot of them develop vision loss as well and want to still have access to the hobby they know and love. And putting the accessibility features in the radio is a way to continue to include as many people as possible instead of exclude them and then have them go out and form an alternate community to get this done. So there you go. There's my little soapbox rant. Any of you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just one little thing. I've been saying ever since I've been in the hobby that all mobile radios should be accessible so they can speak when the drivers are driving down the road, and they don't have to put their eyeballs on the screen to do anything. Those radios that are not accessible are actually dangerous to operate while you're running down the road at 80 miles an hour. Put voice prompts in. Every manufacturer should put voice prompts in every mobile radio made.
Now, that's a good point, Joel. And in fact, a number of sighted people do use Open GD77 and now Open MD9600 for exactly that reason.
Yep, I can attest to that. I check into the Papa System DMR net on Monday nights here in California, and there are several people who are on that net that are fully sighted and use the Open GD77 radios. And usually when they ask questions, I'm one of the guys that can give the answer because I'm using it as well. So there's really no reason why not have this. And it's a known fact that things that start out as accessibility features become used by the mainstream. Case in point, Siri, your smart speakers, all these things that you talk to now that listen to you and act on what you said. All this stuff started as research to help people with motor disabilities. So there's just no downside to doing this. And, again, when you look at this community, all volunteer, nobody gets paid for any of this, and you look at what they've developed, it really just, it means there's no excuse for a company that has resources and lots more money behind it why they can't do the same thing.
Just one small point, Julian. I don't think we've actually demonstrated what it sounds like with the MD9600 while we've been making the recording. I'll just quickly press the P2 button so that people can hear what things sound like. It's running at 2x0 speed.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes.
Oh, hope that came over.
Yeah, it did. There may be some people who will probably have a hard time understanding because it's a little faster. But again, as Ian pointed out, there are different voice prompts now available that operate at different speeds. So if you like it slow, you can keep it at the default level. But for those of us that like it fast, and there are definitely a lot of us out there, it's really wonderful that now we have that option.
I'll hit the P2 button on mine also, and you can hear I'm running the Emma voice, which is the English Emma voice here at 2.0. That's where mine's set now.
Awesome.
Good. That's very good. Wow, it's a great radio, guys, and I appreciate everybody coming and contributing to letting everybody know about this new, wonderful, accessible mobile radio.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good to keep building this family and adding more radios to it. I think adding a mobile radio to the mix is definitely a game changer, and it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you, Ian. Thanks to Roger as well. Thanks to everybody who works on this. Again, free, no pay here, no compensation. Everybody's doing this voluntarily, and just want you to know this is appreciated by those of us in the community that now suddenly have greater access to amateur radio because of your work.
Ian, would you like to go over the Roger and Daniel and all of them's call sign just to let everybody know who's actually is responsible for implementing all this firmware?
Yeah, okay, that's Roger BK3KYY, Daniel F1 RMB, and Colin in the UK G4EML.
Thinking you are DJ0HF, and I know you have your hand in helping with the accessibility and all the package that you create and maintain. We really like to thank you for all you do for the project too, because your package has been with the MP3 tutorials. I swear I don't know where I would be without those tutorials that you created for your package. It's just can't thank you enough.
Well, the feedback's been fantastic, Joel, from so many people, and that's made it all worthwhile.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming here. Hopefully, we can have you back at some point down the road, maybe when the package moves along and is ready to, exits the alpha stage. We could talk about it then. So on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. I want to thank everybody for listening to CQ Blind Hams. I want to thank everybody who participated in this roundtable discussion. Again, if you want to learn more about the Blind Hams system, as well as all kinds of helpful resources, you can go to www.blindhams.com, www.blindhams.com. So from all of us here at CQ Blind Hams, 73.
73, everybody.
Good
73.
53.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and visit www.blindhams.com.